This is Drive Time with me, Fiona Stalker. 6 minutes past 4. Good to have you with us. First tonight, the Chief Executive of Rape Crisis Scotland has apologised unreservedly to survivors after a damning review found one of its centres failed to protect women-only spaces. Sandy Brindley said she would not resign from her role, but is focused on addressing concerns raised at Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre. An independent review published last week found that one centre had not put survivors first and that women-only spaces had not been provided for 16 months. That led to the resignation of the centre's chief executive, Myrtle Wadwa, a trans woman who was criticised in the review. In an exclusive interview, Sandy Brindley spoke to me a little earlier.
What happened here was significant failures within one of our rape crisis centres. They're autonomous organisations, but they're members of Rape Crisis Scotland. I think there's a lot to do, and I am determined that we're going to do it and make sure survivors across Scotland can be confident in the service they receive, no matter where in Scotland they're looking for support.
So you're not going to resign?
I've worked in rape crisis. I started when I was 21 as a volunteer on a helpline. I turned 50 in January. I really believe in this movement. We have achieved so much. I think there's still a lot to do, and as long as I feel that I can contribute to that and make a difference for survivors, I will be staying.
OK. There's some that would say that you're putting yourself before the service, because this row has been damaging. Are you putting yourself before survivors? Some have said you're hiding behind survivors.
That is one of the key reasons I wanted to do this interview today, is that there have been a whole number of survivors speaking out in social media, defending Rape Crisis Scotland, and that is really lovely. But I am the Chief Executive of Rape Crisis Scotland. It is my job to answer questions and answer any concerns and to be accountable for what is happening in terms of rape crisis services across Scotland.
There have been feelings. Do you apologise to the survivors? I
would unreservedly apologise to any survivor who's either been let down by Edinburgh, although I do think it is important to recognise the report, the independent report, found that many survivors received a vital service from Edinburgh Rape Crisis. But to any survivor who didn't feel able to access the service at Edinburgh, I would apologise, and I'd also apologise if we haven't been clear enough at Rape Crisis Scotland that our absolute priority is making sure that every survivor who needs a rape crisis service will get the service they need.
How involved were you, Ms Brindley, with the appointment of Myrtle Wadwa?
I had no involvement. They're an independent centre. They have their own board. It is the board that is responsible for appointments.
Do you agree with her appointment?
At the time, there was no reason not to. She had significant experience in the violence against women sector. What we have seen in this report, however, is quite a significant failure of management and governance within the centre. And I think it is incumbent on the ERCC board, with our support, to make sure those feelings are addressed.
How much of that would you take responsibility for as your failure in the position that you're in?
We need a much more robust framework in place for assessing the national service standards. At the moment, what happens is centres sign up, so they do a declaration on a yearly basis that they're working within the standards, including providing women-only spaces. However, despite making this declaration to us, it's clear that Edinburgh were not working within the standards for 16 months, and we weren't aware of that. And that is something that really concerns me. So what we're looking to do is to put in place a robust framework of assessment with external verification to make sure that we can be confident the standards are followed, but most importantly, to make sure survivors can be confident the standards are followed.
Why wasn't that failure picked up for 16 months, do you think?
I discovered the situation in Edinburgh last October. The leadership team met with me to tell me about the circumstances leading to their forthcoming employment tribunal, and I was really concerned by what they told me. So what I did was I requested an urgent meeting with the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Board, and I asked them to conduct an urgent internal review into policies and guidance around the support service at Edinburgh.
And that was in October?
That was in October. I then wrote them formally to outline my concerns. In January, they had the employment tribunal, and it was clear to us from the evidence that came out of the employment tribunal that there was significant issues, and also that there was clear lessons to be learned, and that's why we commissioned an independent review.
Just back to the appointment, was there not any point that you could foresee controversy with the appointment of a trans woman to an organisation like Rape Crisis?
It definitely did prove to be controversial. I was not involved in that appointment or that decision, but what I would say is that most rape crisis centres in Scotland, not all, but most, provide support to men, women, trans people and non-binary people. So there's no inherent reason within that you couldn't have a trans person working within a rape crisis centre. I think what is crucial, however, is that if you do have a rape crisis service that is supporting all survivors, that there's dedicated women-only spaces within that is a priority for many women. That is protected within your centre. And this is the issue, is that it wasn't protected within the Edinburgh Centre.
Do you have any regrets about this issue? And if you could, would you have handled things differently?
I have many regrets about this situation. One of my biggest regrets is the impact on survivors, and particularly survivors who have spoken out online to defend Rape Crisis Scotland. They have been subject to the most horrendous abuse. It is absolutely astonishing to me that this is the position we're in, where rape survivors can be treated in this way in the name of women's rights, supposedly. The onus is on me as the Chief Executive of Rape Crisis Scotland and on the rape crisis movement to try and move to a place where rape crisis is not being weaponised.
And you can hear the full interview from Sandy Brindley after 5 here on Drive Time. But let's speak now to our chief political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes. She's on the line now. Lindsay, good to speak to you. You've been following this story for quite some time now. Remind us, if you would, the context to this. What's this all about?
Yeah, well, Sandy Brindley has been criticised by some following that review of the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre, the investigation that found it had not put survivors first or adhered to those national service standards that are a requirement by Rape Crisis Scotland, the organisation that she heads up. Also, that criticism of the centre's chief executive officer, trans woman Myrtle Wadwa, that you mentioned there, who had failed to behave professionally and was said to not understand the limits of her authority. Now, Rape Crisis Scotland has paused those new referrals to the centre and said it was extremely concerned that women-only spaces had not been provided for 16 months. That's a requirement in their national service standards. The review itself was sparked after that employment tribunal found that a counsellor with gender-critical views working at Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre had been unfairly and constructively dismissed. That sparked that review, which we have now found out were further failings at Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre, and Sandy Brindley is now under pressure over that.
And you say she's under pressure, and there have been calls for Sandy Brindley to step down. We've got a longer interview on after 5 o'clock, Lindsay. I know you've listened across to that. Do you think what she's saying will be enough to satisfy her critics and the calls for her to quit?
Well, Fiona, the row around gender ideology is, of course, the backdrop to this case. Sandy Brindley had previously been criticised by women's rights campaigners, some women's rights campaigners, for her backing of the Scottish Government's proposals to change gender recognition laws. She's spoken in the past about the importance of inclusivity for trans people in terms of the provision of services such as rape crisis services. Now, others have been raising their own concerns about maintaining single-sex spaces and services and what changes in the proposed changes in the laws could mean for that. Now, Sue Webber, the Conservative MSP, has spoken out saying a change of culture is now needed at Rape Crisis Scotland, and that Sandy Brindley had championed policies at the centre of what she was describing as a caustic situation. She said that women's safety rather than gender ideology should take precedence. But the issue rather that you focused on in your interview with her was around governance and accountability. Now, Sandy Brindley has apologised and said action is being taken, but I think there's still going to be questions over whether she could and should have acted sooner to address some of the failings and make sure that service standards were being adhered to.
Lindsay, thank you for that analysis. That's our chief political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes there. You can hear the full interview. Sandy Brindley speaking to us exclusively after Drive Time at 5 o'clock, after 5 o'clock on Drive Time rather.